Today we're visiting with Don Nicholson. He's Region 7 Area Agronomist for North Carolina Department of Agriculture. Don, you have done a lot of work with sorghum. You really were one of the pioneers in the beginning, you and David Dicus. And let's talk a little bit about where you started as far as sorghum's concerned.
Well, we're looking for a rotational crop. You know, there's a lot of, myself, David Dicus, who used to be a regional agronomist, Rick Morris, we're all in areas that have a lot of sandy ground in it. We were looking in also kind of the epicenter of where the palmer amaranth resistant weeds have kind of popped up, and a lot of farmers are struggling with the weed in soybeans and cotton, especially in soybeans, seems like. And we're very heavy in soybeans, so we're looking for a rotational crop, not only for the resistant weeds, but also for soybean cyst nematode. A lot of damage on soybeans with soybean cyst nematode and sandy ground, and we've got plenty of it in those regions. So we're looking for something that we could rotate with it, with the crops, the traditional crops that we have there, and something that's a little more low cost than corn, because corn is so expensive and so just not a very profitable crop every year in the sand hills of North Carolina.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know that you've had some full season as well as some double crop producers in your area, and they've done really well.
Some of them have. You know, we've had some very good success double cropping it. It seems just like everything else is weather related. The weather hit it just right a couple of years ago, and just made some bumper crops with well over 100 bushels. Mm-hmm. Double crop, and that was a really nice hit there. And our full season yields have done pretty well too. Like any other crop that you have, you're always going to have some weather concerns, and you know, if it hits it wrong, dry weather, hot weather. The nice thing about this crop is it'll hunker down and kind of just wait some bad weather out. And you know, I've had some folks that made 50, 60 bushels and not rain for 76 days straight in the summertime. Mm-hmm. In 2011, and that was fairly impressive to me. A corn crop would have been harvested with a bush hog with that little bit of rain in the summertime. Mm-hmm. On some sandy ground.
And you've also found that it's a good rotation for tobacco.
It is a very good rotation for tobacco. Any kind of grass crop you can put in a rotation for tobacco is a good rotation as far as root knot nematode, northern root knot nematode, which is prevalent in the tobacco producing areas of North Carolina. It's a good rotation. It seems to be a really good rotation for that. There was some concern in some of the literature that maybe it was not as good a rotation crop because of root knot, but the research done here in North Carolina and in South Carolina seems to support the fact that it's going to be a good rotation for root knot nematode in addition to soybean cyst.
Now, you know, 2013 was discouraging for sorghum producers as well as a lot of other producers, but I think that most people realize that 2013, as far as moisture is concerned, it was an anomaly.
I've been around North Carolina all my life, and I've never seen one that wet. And a lot of crops were on the struggle bus from the beginning, and it was a really challenging year. And we have found out that evidently grain sorghum does not like wet feed any more than tobacco does. But you know, it's been my experience in my lifetime that we're going to have way more dry years than we will wet years, especially coming in like 2013. It was just unprecedented.
So, you know, if you grew sorghum last year, possibly for the first time, don't let 2013 sway your future decisions.
If you're looking for something to rotate your crops with, that's a good rotation. I would encourage anybody to give it another chance. You know, prices are not as attractive as they were, but you know, if you're only making 10, 15 bushels of soybeans, that's not very attractive too with what it costs to grow soybeans. So I mean, anecdotally, we haven't really done. I haven't done any research personally, and I haven't seen any research of what it actually does for soybean yields. But anecdotally, I have watched it over the last 4 or 5 years, and I'm seeing soybeans doing better in a rotation with grain sorghum than I have with just soybeans monoculture year after year. Even with wheat in there, I see better soybeans with a crop of grain sorghum in there.
Now, let me ask you this. You know, you mentioned input cost and management. Sorghum does require some management, but it's not as management intensive as some other crops.
That's true. It's not as management intensive, but it does respond to it. We have done some research on that, the regional agronomists have, and we're looking at different management levels. You know, you've got a level of not doing anything to the crop, pretty much plant it, put some nitrogen to it, put some herbicide on it, and walk away from it, and the next thing that goes into the field is a combine. Up to doing some extra things like putting in, splitting your nitrogen, doing maybe some starter nitrogen at the beginning, spraying it with a fungicide, maybe insecticide if it's needed, doing those high management things that can make some difference at the end. And we're, like I say, 2013 was a really tough year to try to really hang your hat on anything,
Mm-hmm.
but we were seeing we did see some differences in high management versus basically no management.
Mm-hmm. Now, some producers have been concerned about harvest, particularly producers that are accustomed to corn and the moisture level that you need to harvest corn at, not the same number for sorghum.
It's not the same number. We still want to harvest it as high moisture as you can run a combine through it, 19-20%. And the reasoning behind that is we don't have as much harvest loss at a higher percentage. Yeah, you're probably going to trade some money because of higher moisture and drying costs with the companies, whoever buys it from you. But most of the time, economically, you're coming out ahead harvesting on the early side and getting it hauled and let somebody else take care of it then. And the biggest thing, if you harvest high moisture, you want to do it and be able to take that grain to market as soon as possible,
Mm-hmm.
because it'll, if it's over 19-20%, it'll set up on you in 24-48 hours and really start molding, and nobody wants that.
No, and of course, if you think you get docked for wet grain, you're going to really get docked for mold.
That's correct. I've seen 2-ton truckloads of it, over 20%, turn into a block of grain sorghum after about 2 days. So, just have all your ducks in a row when you start harvesting. Have a home for it before you plant it. Make sure that you're talking to folks, talking to any of the entities that will buy grain sorghum. Make sure that you have a home for it before you ever put the first seed in the ground,
Mm-hmm.
or at least start talking about it.
Now, you mentioned regional agronomists doing some field work, and you've done some variety trials and things like that.
Well, kind of left most of the variety trials to Dr. Heiniger at NC State. We've done a lot of, our mission in life is to work with nutrients, whether, we're with the soil lab and we do tissue sampling and all that good stuff. So we've done a lot of nitrogen rate studies to make sure our numbers that were with the NCDA, our recommendations are probably from back in the late 70s, early 80s, when grain sorghum had a bigger presence in North Carolina than it did 5 years ago. And we just wanted to make sure that our numbers were correct, that we're giving the growers of North Carolina the best information they can get. And in 2013, we did some sulfur rate studies, and of course with the weather, that's kind of messed that up some too. Just like any farming operation, we've had some weather difficulties too. And but we did have some pretty good numbers, and we're staying by our recommendations that if you have very little sulfur in your soil, when you pull your soil test, that you need to add some. And it's all about nitrogen utilization. The nitrogen needs some sulfur present in order to utilize the nitrogen like you want it to.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Don, anything we need to add?
No, I would just encourage anybody that's lacking a rotational crop in their rotation to give grain sorghum a fair shake. 2013 was a bitter pill to swallow on a lot of levels, and if 2013 was your first time out with grain sorghum, it may get you a little gun shy about trying it again, but it's a really good rotation on a lot of levels. We can hammer a pigweed in this crop from the start to almost to the finish. We can really hammer a pigweed, and that's nice on a lot of levels. We can get that, at least take that out of the equation for at least 1 year. And Dr. York and several more of the wheat science crowd said if you can keep this seed from coming up for 3 years, the viability of the seed goes very, very, very far down.
Mm-hmm.
And using no-till or strip till or something like that with this crop, it keeps you from tearing it up and keeping those seeds buried for a couple, 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we can work this seed bank down too, and in addition to giving us a good rotational crop for our sweet potatoes, tobacco, peanuts, I think it's a good rotation for a lot of our more higher value crops.
Outstanding. Don Nicholson, Region 7 agronomist with North Carolina Department of Agriculture.